Greetings, church. This Sunday's gospel is a familiar story to many of us. Jesus and his disciples had just had a miraculous meal with 5,000 of their closest friends. He was bone tired, and having just heard of the death of his friend and precursor, John, he was grief-stricken as well. So, following this miracle meal, he sent the disciples to sea, dismissed the crowd, and retreated to a mountain spot to pray. Soon the disciples were caught up in a bad storm, and the fishermen among them would be the first to exclaim that this is not the kind of water they wanted to be near, let alone in. Jesus and his disciples had been in this distressed at sea situation before, if you refer to Matthew 8, verses 23 to 27. Jesus would have known in the depths of his being that this storm was going to happen. So he had a reason, probably several reasons, for giving them the opportunity of facing the storm. But remember, he sent them into danger, and he went into prayer, no doubt for their safety during the tumult. So Jesus let them be buffeted about for most of the night. Finally, they perceived someone apparently walking effortlessly on the water. The disciples could not have had a wink of sleep trying to fight the wind, so of course they had exhausted, sleep-deprived thoughts like, "It's a ghost." But as the figure drew nearer, they saw that it might actually be Jesus. Peter, impetuous man that he was, decided to find out for sure. "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And so Jesus bid him. Peter, never taking his eyes off Jesus, climbed out of the boat and took a few tentative steps. Everything was just fine until he sort of came to and took a look around at what he was actually doing, how wildly improbable it was, and began to sink like a stone. The distressing and upheaving times we are in these days could be a stand-in for the tumultuous sea in this passage. Sometimes, even if we squint our eyes, we cannot see Jesus walking toward us through an ER filled with COVID patients, or a protest gathering for racial justice, or a political squabble where there seems not to be a good resolution. To one degree or another, we are all in stormy weather, with very low visibility and a high risk of taking a wrong turn. But I recall often the tagline from a long ago sermon, "What are you doing under the circumstances?" That is not where God's children belong. Christians are more than conquerors, according to Romans 8:37. And the circumstances of our lives should take a back seat to the reality of our relationship with God in Jesus Christ. Even as it appears that Peter was asking God to prove himself, God was giving Peter the same chance. As long as we live our lives focused on Christ, we will be amazed at the stormy seas we too will be enabled to tread. When we take our eyes off our Savior and Lord, that's when we begin to sink under the circumstances and lose our spiritual and temporal footing. In both stories featuring Jesus, exhausted disciples, wobbly boats, and bad storms, do not forget that Jesus ended up in the boat with them. He doesn't calm our storms and walk away. He calms our storms and comes even closer to us. His very incarnation is his way of getting into our boats and helping us row our way to shore. Jesus was actually inviting Peter and each of us out into the swirling uncertainties and knock you over tidal waves of life, so that whether we begin to sink or are able to swim, God will keep us afloat. And in that process, we will finally know who Jesus is with us and for us. When we reach our own limitations, that is when God bids us walk with him. That walk will almost certainly include deep, troubled waters, as well as placid seas. To each of us and for all our lives, Jesus will always say, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid."